Thank you, everybody. We're back on camera. We're live. We're back in the room. So, just for the benefit of any members of the public who weren't able to see what we were talking about, that paper from Arlene Close was noted, and well, it was noted by the committee. I think that's all I need to say. Moving on to agenda item 15. So this is the Ernst & Young draft audit results report for the year ended 31 March 22. We are being asked to receive the report. Larissa, who's our audit manager, is here to take questions. We've had some disagreement about how we handle this item, I'll be honest with you. I believe it's a vital part of any governance framework that members have an opportunity to ask questions of the auditors without the CFO present, basically, without officers present. I have been informed by the monitoring officer that that is not allowed. Would you please confirm that, monitoring officer? So she's just confirmed that's not allowed. I was also told that Larissa, our audit manager, would not be prepared to go into closed session with members to ask questions without officers present. Is that correct?
I'm afraid we haven't discussed this.
I discussed it with Maria.
Okay, that is correct.
Okay. I'm obviously not as familiar with council finances as I am with perhaps third sector in the charity or in the commercial world. I consider it a normal part of good governance to be able to talk to the auditors without the people who prepare the numbers present. I'm getting at least one nod from around the room. Where we're going to go with this is that I'm going to do some more research. I will probably write to SIPFA. I will probably write to the Audit Commission to understand our rights as a committee in this regard. So that's just the background to this agenda item. Larissa, if you'd like to just give us a couple of minutes introducing the report.
So I'm going to summarize the results of our audit. The audit has been substantially complete. The draft that you see in front of you was issued on the 19th of July, and we have made some progress since that date. I will walk you through the key points, and then I'll open up for questions. Starting with the page 6, all page references are references to our pages, not the whole agenda pack. Starting on page 6, you see a list of outstanding items which we need to complete to sign off the audit opinion. The first one is with regards to our conclusion on the impact of the triennial valuation on the defined pension benefit amount. We have made progress on this item, and it's substantially complete apart from the partner's final review and sign-off. Just to give you a background on the nature of the issue, for those who are not familiar with the item, the actuaries employed by the council undertake a triennial valuation, which means a full valuation, updating all the inputs into the actual calculation to calculate the pension asset and liability relating to defined pension benefits. The last update was has taken place as at March 2022, but with the report issued in March 2023, which meant that we had to consider the results of that report for the roll forward results as of March 2022. So this work has been completed in the last couple of months. The IS19 results were updated by the actuary, which resulted in a decrease in pension liability by 7.2 million, which the council decided to correct, update in the accounts, and we have reviewed the updated accounts. So we have no findings to report subsequent to that update. The difference is not included in this draft in front of you because of the timing of issuing this report. The next procedure we have to update is our review of the going concern, but more specifically the financial resilience of the council, which has to take place until we issue the audit results report, and it has to cover at least 12 months from the auditor's opinion. Other procedures which are protocol procedures to complete our audit would be updating our subsequent events and receiving the signed representation letter from management. moving on to the next page, with regards to value for money, we completed our risk assessment under the 3 criteria you see listed on this page, and we have not identified risks of significant weaknesses in arrangements. We will update our procedures until the sign-off date. Moving on to the next page. On page 8, you see the key findings from our audit. I will explain the audit differences, those corrected and uncorrected. The first uncorrected audit difference relates to a judgmental difference related to the Goodwin case. It's a case that adds to the uncertainty of the measurement of the pension benefit liability. And this is a recurring difference that we report every year until the case is closed, and it hasn't been closed. The amounts might change slightly due to updating the IAS 19 results, but the difference will stay reported and similar to the amounts you see here, which is 575,000 for 21-22. The next uncorrected audit difference is the recognition of the accounting treatment of an upfront payment received from the tenant of Basingstoke site for a lease restructuring. In simple terms, our view is that this upfront payment should be recognized as income over the life of the lease agreement, and in the account it has been recognized as income in the year that it was received. Moving on to the corrected audit difference, we report all corrected audit differences above 1.4 million, and we have only one difference to report. It's similar in nature to the upfront payment I just described, except that this difference relates to a building that was received from the tenant of the Business Park Site 3 for a lease restructuring. The building was initially recognized as a gain on disposal of investment property when it was transferred to under the council's ownership, and our view was that, and it's still that the income has to be amortized over the life of the lease. This has been corrected in the accounts, which resulted in a reduction of the gain on disposal of investment property by 4.6 million. And an increase in deferred income in the same amount, so it's a balance sheet item. Moving on to other reporting issues, in this report we write that we're not in a position to issue the completion certificate, which confirms that we completed all our responsibilities with regards to 2021 and 2022 audit. As of last week, we're able to issue the completion certificate for 2021 only. NAO confirmed that they completed their whole of government accounts process as of last week, and there is no more work resulting for us to complete. We can issue the certificate as soon as the audit partner is back from annual leave. Moving on to the next page. Page 9 presents a summary of our significant risks and other areas of audit focus. Our procedures, a summary of our procedures and a summary of our results. I would like to highlight only the control observations that we summarized on page 31. So on page 31 of our report, we note 3 control recommendations. It is to be noted that the audit is not designed to identify deficiencies in internal control, but if these come to our attention, we're required to report them. We have not identified any significant deficiencies in design or operation of internal controls. However, we have some observations we'd like to bring to your attention. The first one is with regards to the audit process. So it's a point that could increase the efficiency of the audit process, and it has to do with the council's process of compiling listings of debtors and creditors to provide for the audit procedures to take place. We have made recommendations to improve the level of detail of these listings provided at the start of the audit, so that we minimize the iterations during the audit process. The other control observation was with regards to the disclosure of future lease payments. It's a required disclosure under the SIPFA code. We identified certain misstatements that were corrected by management, and in light of those adjustments, management identified certain control adjustments, internal control adjustments that they confirmed they will implement to avoid such findings in the future. And the last control observation is with regards to the corrected and uncorrected adjustments that I described above in relation to the amortization of upfront payments on lease restructurings. We are recommended to improve the level of detail of supporting documentation for complex transactions and rationale for accounting treatment. And this brings me to the conclusion of the main points I wanted to highlight from our report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Atkin. Thank you, Larissa. Councillor Atkin.
Thank you very much. It's a very full report and I welcome it. You have mentioned capital receipts a couple of times on lease changes. Are we always going to amortise them across the whole period, or will we take them on a one by each case separately?
So in normal circumstances, it depends on the actual lease agreement, and therefore we would have to do it on a case-by-case basis. So we would apply the most appropriate accounting policy depending on the actual transaction deal itself.
I come on to the fees. Now, obviously, we're a well-run council. Do we know in those fees, do we get discount because we're well-run as a council? Or, I mean, because quite frankly, some councils are so complex with what they've done in all of their audit returns that it's difficult to go through it. Do we get discount, or do we get looked after? Because you know you do a fine job in finance.
It's a great question, Councillor Atkin. There is a fairly unusual and not particularly complex group buying structure in place, which I'm sure either Sue or Larissa will take the question.
In terms of audit fees, our fees are directly proportional to the level of effort required for the audit, and the final fee is determined based on the number of hours spent on the audit. So we do take into account when councils are less complex through the effort required to complete an audit.
I think Sue's going to explain the group buying more eloquently than me.
Well, no, actually, I wasn't going to pick that point up, but we can do. So the majority of councils in the country actually all do a joint procurement through the PSAA, which means that effectively they deal with the auditors on our behalf and appoint a variety of different firms across the country who then are allocated to individual councils. What I was actually going to add is that as part of that and as part of the National Audit Office, etc., and the audit, a number of changes have been made in terms of what the auditors are requested to look at, which in part has led to some of the increase in value. And we've had confirmation, for example, that we will get a contribution from central government towards those additional audit fees for 22-23 and future years. So about half of the increase in fees will be met by a further grant from government.
So that means that we're not subsidising Thurrock, Crawley, all the ones that have gone bust, Woking, because obviously we don't want to do that. You know, we want to be judged on our own merits.
I think we're not subsidising them, Ken, but it's a great question. Thank you. Councillor Phillimore.
Yes, Chair. Excuse my lack of knowledge. I'm only an accountant in the motor trade. I just do tin cans on wheels. But this gain on disposal investment of 4.6 million, was that accounted in the profit and loss to start with, or was that just a balance sheet item? Was it in the profit and loss to start with?
Yes, it was.
So you said it was. Sorry, but you just said it was a balance sheet item only, and it was profit and loss change.
So it's about it's about the timing of recognition of the income. in our view, the benefit received by the council is throughout the term of the lease. Entering that lease enabled the council to receive that building.
Was the original 4.6 in this year's accounts?
So I think the income still has to be recognised initially as 4.6 million. It's then how we actually show it on our balance sheet. So we would have shown it as a one-off lump sum, as a capital receipt. And what they wanted us to do was to amortise it over the life of the actual asset. So it would effectively release, we took all the money in 1 year effectively, but what we were asked to do is actually recognise it on an annual basis over the life of the lease. And so it's an adjustment on the balance sheet.
Any more follow-up questions, Councillor Phillimore? Or? No. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? I would just like to add, for the minutes, the control recommendations set out by the auditors on, I don't know which page of the auditors, oh, it's page 31. It's page 250 of our packs. There are two recommendations there about internal controls around property that officers assure me would be reported back on in the audit report next year. I've asked whether either internal audit or Section 151 officer can just report back to us at a future meeting mid-year, so we get an update of where we are with that, because I'd hate to get to a year in and have the same audit recommendations on the report. I guess that's just that's a bad hangover from my work in the past. So, and also the IFRS 16 preparations that the auditor's report highlights. It would be good to have an understanding. I'm guessing from Adam Swain might be the right person for that, but not tonight, Adam, but another time, an update on where we are with that would be most welcome. So I believe the requirement here is that we recommend the committee receive the report. So I'm going to move from the chair that we receive it. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Tom, thank you. So is the committee agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, Larissa. Thanks for your time. So we'll move on to item 16, which is the statement of accounts for the year to 31 March 22. This is the third time this has come forward to the committee, and some of the delays in the past have revolved around this £4.6 million capital gain or deferred income issue with regards to St Modwen and that transaction. We also have two non-adjusting items which are in the audit paper, one of which was £499,000 item where the auditors and our officers disagreed on the accounting treatment, but we have not been required to adjust it because it is under the materiality threshold. So I just wanted to flag up for members with that. It's around that issue that I wanted to ask the auditors some private questions which have been denied. And so with regards to this statement of accounts, I will not be moving it from the chair, but I will be looking for another member to move it and for another member to second it. Sue.
It doesn't actually have to be moved. It's just a recommendation that has to be agreed by the committee. But if I just may add, just for clarity, in relation to the questions that were sought to be asked on this paper, our view is, as is the acting monitoring officer, that the officers should be present. The officers of the council have not denied the committee the ability to be able to speak to the auditors outside of the audit meeting for any general queries that they have. It is appropriate, in our opinion, obviously not necessarily the chairs, that officers are present for questions on papers that they have prepared. So I just wanted to clarify that point. In this particular scenario, we believe the officers should be present, but there will be a meeting arranged attached to one of the audit meetings throughout the year when members will have the opportunity to speak generally to external auditors as per good practice.
Just to be clear, sorry, Councillor Batten, if I may, and then I'll come to you. Just to be clear, there is nothing wrong with these set of accounts. What is being done here is that a difference of accounting treatment is being applied to two transactions. One of them is below the materiality threshold, so the auditors have said that that's fine, you can do that, you can treat that as you wish, and we don't need to qualify the accounts on that basis. So there's nothing untoward happening here. My concern revolves around the fact that we are taking an accounting standard and applying it differently and not consistently. And obviously the materiality consideration overrides that and means that what we're doing is perfectly legal and above board, if that's the right phrase, and still means that we have a true and fair set of accounts. Councillor Attigan.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I'd be happy to move them, because obviously at some point I was in the cabinet while these were coming around, and perhaps John could second it. But we attend the meeting if you do have a meeting with the auditors privately.
Oh, of course, that's great. Thank you. So it's to move. So to be clear, it's to move that authority is delegated to me as the chair of the Audit and Accounts Committee, in consultation with Sue, the Section 151 officer of Corporate Services and Assets, to approve the statement of accounts for the year ended 31 March 22, and is authorised to subsequently sign the statement of responsibilities to that effect on behalf of the committee. Is the committee agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
What we will do subsequent to committee is we will seek, as part of the work programme, the officers' members' preferred date for auditors to come in, and they will be here half an hour before the meeting starts to talk to any members that wish to attend.
Sorry, can I just be clear? What is it that we are looking to discuss with the auditors? Is it just these two? It's a general opportunity to talk to them with officers present. No officers present.
So this is at the core of my problem with the issue, John, is that we have an opportunity to talk to the auditors, but will we actually have anything to talk to them about if it doesn't relate to a paper?
So normal good practice linked to Audit and Account Committee is that members have the opportunity to speak to external audit if they so wish. In normal practice, what would happen is an issue would arise. So there'd be something within the council that the members feel that they actually, it's not to do with an officer produced paper, there's a genuine concern that you wish to talk to the auditors about, and we would arrange that meeting for you. What I've been asked to do is to arrange a meeting anyway as part of the standard annual work programme, so you may or may not have anything you wish to discuss with them, and we can always move it if we need to, but actually in normal circumstances it would be as the result of a request to say we wish to speak to the auditors about a specific issue, but not necessarily a paper that's been generated by officers.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, I would just like to add for the minutes there, Phil, that the committee carried that, but I abstained. Thank you. Moving on to item 6, internal audit progress report, March to July 2023. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is my regular reports on the work undertaken by the internal audit team, and this covers the period March through to July this year, and it also represents completion of the audit plan for 22-23. Also include the current position with outstanding audit recommendations as well. So the table in paragraph 4.1 of my report shows the 11 audits that we completed in that period, and with the relevant levels of assurance, and they are summarised in appendices 2 through to 12 on my report. The recommendations are summarised in appendix 1 of the report, with the detail in paragraphs 4.2 and 4.3. I haven't got anything else to add. Happy to take questions. Just request that the committee note the report.
Councillor Tustain.
Thank you for the report. as always, I think this question does keep coming up. It's around the target dates and things and the revisions, and some of those have moved on, and obviously some of these risks are quite significant or fundamental. And I just want to know, I mean, for example, just looking here, bank reconciliation, fundamental risk, original target date 31st of May. There's a lot of these that are outstanding, and they seem to come up time and time again. So what reassurance have we got about getting these dates and these things closed off?
So obviously the dates are to a certain degree the officer's best estimate for when the work will be done. It's not an exact science, so yes, occasionally the work does extend beyond that. As a rule, we don't really extend the deadlines, but we usually do on the first occasion. But then after that, we tend to stick with the revised one, just to highlight the fact that the work is still ongoing. But the purpose of Appendix 1 shows that the progress or the latest comment from the relevant head of service to show that work is ongoing. And that's the main point, I think, from our point of view. The fact that there is work, the work is being done towards it. You mentioned about the bank reconciliation, so that is a general issue with some of the new processes around the new ERP system. So that very much is it was a best guess, on behalf of the officers, which we agree with at the time of the report. The only ones that are really long overdue, I suppose, are the very first ones on Appendix 1 in relation to business continuity. But I've, as part of the 23-24 audit, I have actually finished the business continuity audit, because that's now moved over to the head of customer services. So my report will come to the next committee on that. So the recommendations are still there, but there is significant progress being made. So long-winded way of answering your question, yeah. But we monitor on a regular basis, and also a point to note as well. We have, I think, the number of recommendations I'm reporting. Probably the lowest it's been since I've been doing this. Not because we haven't made any recommendations, but because we have, we have cleared quite a few. We have, I feel the last 12 months we've got a better communication with other services, and here property services are a good example where, as the committee knows, we've had long-standing recommendations in the past. But now we have good evidence that the work is being done to the best of the officers' ability and with the resources that they have.
Councillor Atkin.
Thank you, Chair. Glaringly, in Appendix, the contract standing orders, that's red. There was a date for October 22. It got revised to December 22. We're now in late 23. There's a problem now. I just don't understand why that hasn't been resolved, because these are large amounts of money with these contracts. Why hasn't that been picked up as a priority?
I think Sue wants to answer that one.
I'm not actually sure why that one hasn't been updated. So contract standing orders have been reviewed, and they will be part of the constitution update that's probably coming to council in October. The actual full review of all of the activities in terms of spend over 75k has been reviewed, and there are a number of changes to contract standing orders in order to address some of the issues that were raised.
I'm grateful for that. Then if it has been updated, can you inform the rest of this committee of that as a note to us in the next few weeks?
I think Sue's taking that as an action. Richard has a comment as well.
Yes, in anticipation of that question for the update, with regards to the contract standing orders, yes, I've had regular updates, probably more than any other with regards to this particular audit. I just didn't include the previous updates in this particular spreadsheet. I'm happy to provide those updates to you. That's fine.
Any other questions? Thank you, Richard. Very comprehensive, as always. I think you're right, the direction of travel is positive. The list seems to be getting slightly shorter and slightly less orange and red than it was. I just had one question around, I mean, I'm always focused on property being our largest asset and our largest source of income. We have a red on page 6 out of 10 on commercial rents and maintenance around process mapping around commercial rents. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, so it's one that, yes, is from a recent audit, which we only completed in June. So we haven't yet, the completion date for that we've agreed with property is 30th of September. So hopefully at the next meeting, next committee, if it's September, I'm presenting, then there will be an update on that.
Great, thank you. So if there are no other questions, I'll move this one from the chair. I think this is probably one to note, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I've lost my place in my pack. I really have lost my place. Page 81. Crikey, that's why I was so far out. So it's recommended the committee note the contents of this report. I'll move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Is the committee agreed? Thank you, Councillor Tastain. Committee agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Moving on to item 7, more internal audit. This one is the internal audit annual report 2022-23. Again, it's a paper for noting. I'll let the officer introduce the paper and then we'll take questions. What I would add again is the direction of travel is positive. I also think substantial assurance overall is a very good result. I would be interested in the officer's view on whether he would ever be able to give full assurance. I think that would probably be quite a difficult leap to take.
Thank you, Chair. I'll answer that one first. There is a possibility of a full assurance if we get to a year where we provide a full assurance for every internal audit, or not every, majority of internal audits we carry out, and we're not in a dire position with outstanding recommendations. So there is a possibility of that. So yes, this is my report that gives the committee my annual opinion on the effectiveness of the council's risk management, control and governance processes. My opinion is based on the work that's carried out by internal audit, and Appendix 1, which is on page 87, it's a simple table that lists the audits that have been carried out with the assurance levels for each, and the year that the summary report was presented to committee, if you so wish to go back to any of those. That all leads into my annual opinion, as the Chair's already mentioned, of substantial assurance, which is paragraph 4.4. And I wasn't going to add any more to that because of the time, so I just asked the committee to note the report. Thank you.
Councillor Atkin.
Chair, can I have a question of you, Paul? Your opinion is great. Are you getting an increased workload, or do you feel that you've got sufficient capacity to continue your work in the alternate?
So my audit plan is approved by committee every year. We complete our audit plan each year. From a resource capacity, we do currently have an advert out for a vacancy, which we're, fingers crossed, we're hoping to fill, and that's hopefully beneficial from the pay and benefits review that's been carried out, so we're hoping that's going to be able to attract somebody for us. But I'm comfortable that we've got the right mechanism of process in place to fulfil the audit plan.
Any other questions? Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, thank you for the report, Paul. It seems that you are assessing all the risks equally. Do you ever look at them and say, actually, there are some risks that are of greater risk to the council and therefore need to be given your special attention, or the officers in that team a special attention?
In terms of creating my audit plan, it's done on a risk assessment basis. So there are some audits that we do every year based on my risk assessment. Some are done every 2 years. And in terms of how do I ensure my audit plan is up to date and efficient and sufficient, this year we've added the corporate risk register. So each of the corporate risks will receive its own audit. So if the senior management team telling me those corporate risks are what we believe are the key risks to the authority, they will be audited annually. And again, those reports will come to the committee. So I'm comfortable with my process of creating the audit plan for the committee to approve.
Sorry, Paul, you may have just said it then, I may have missed it. When do we get to shape the audit plan for next year?
So that comes to committee, be March. It comes every March.
Thank you. Any further questions? There's no more questions. I'll move that from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Furthermore. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Moving on to item 8, the fraud update, protecting the public purse. This is a factual paper for noting. I'm going to take it as read. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, Councillor Furthermore has a question.
Yeah, hi Paul, glad to be back. The difference between 2019 and 2020 and 22 and 23 is because of a gap in the COVID period. Does that mean that some of 2022 and 23s include that period? Go on.
If you're looking at I can see what you're looking at. Yeah, that's right. For the rest of the committee, that's Appendix 3 on page 107. Those appendices are just highlighting debt that's outstanding as a result of the work of the team. So it's not necessarily the amount of fraud that we've found in total. So, for example, last year we found 174,000, but again, that's just those relating to housing benefit. So, for example, if we identify a fraud or error that relates to local tax, that will go back onto the bill, so we don't have to invoice them for it. Okay. If that makes sense.
Just a point. On the Appendix 2, would I be astounded that one case racked up 37,499.21?
I wouldn't know if you'd be astounded. I can't comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is eye-catching, isn't it? And I think that what comes through from these numbers is that we have a low number of quite high value debts that then prove very difficult to collect, where some of these people go into IVA or really struggling financially. So anyway, Councillor Rattigan, I believe you had a question.
I was wondering about benchmarking against the rest of Hampshire or local government across the country.
That one is very difficult because each authority is different. So, for example, there's quite a lot of authorities who've got right to buy, and we don't have that, and that's very fruitful from the fraud side of things. So at least that's something we don't have to worry about. So again, it's like trying to compare an apple and a pear.
If there are no further questions, then is the committee happy to note the contents of the report? Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We're going to skip agenda item 9 and move on to item 10, Local Code of Corporate Governance. Sorry, had a bit of difficulty finding it there. So the recommendation here is to approve the Local Code of Corporate Governance 2023-24. Are there any questions, or are we agreed? Councillor Tustain.
I just had a comment actually. I think it was in appendix. When you go through the appendices and and then you go through the grid, I found this very difficult to marry up to make sure that we had the compliance against the principles. And I wonder, just for a future reference, whether it would be possible to make sure that we actually make the table so we can show the compliance. Because when I did the exercise of going through it, and I think there were no identified compliance for 2E or F on principle 4, and 6 I think also had one missing as well. So it might be just there's a note to say it's done through process or something. It's not actually within a policy, but I think it would just be nice because then we could show that compliance and how it's met.
Officer Greaves has a comment.
Yeah, if I can just say, Fiona Thompson's identified that it's not the most, it's not the best way to show the information, so we're going to do a review of it next year and see if we can present it in a more graphic form for members.
Great. If there are no more questions, are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Moving on to item 11, UK GDPR notification of a data breach reported to ICO, and we have an update paper on this which was circulated just before the meeting, which I'll pass over to Anne to cover what that update paper says.
Thank you, Chair. So since the report was written, we've heard from the ICO as a result of the investigation that we undertook into this data breach. So basically they're happy that we've done everything that we should have done. They don't propose to take any further action against us. I've set out in the update paper the reasons that they've come to those conclusions, so it sets out what they're happy with. And then there are some further recommendations that they'd like us to look at as well. So I've set out the recommendations there and put a response against each of those recommendations. So they're things that we'll be taking forward in the course of the year. Happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Tustain.
Just one comment, I think, on the response where we've got one potential resident that may be seeking legal advice. Can we make sure we get an update? Will we get an update on that?
If she does actually take any action, I suspect she probably won't at the end of the day, but yeah.
Just a quick question, Anne. When would we or would we not get an update on where we were with the recommendations?
We wouldn't usually bring back an update on the specific recommendations from the ICO. It's kind of taken that the officers responsible signed that they agreed to undertake the recommendations, and then we monitor it in the information governance team to make sure that they've done what they've said so that we can see improvement and we won't get a similar situation.
Thank you. Would you be happy to report back by exception if you felt that something wasn't happening?
Definitely, yes.
Thank you. I'm obviously keen not to add to the paper workload here. Can we take that paper as we're invited to note the contents of the report? Are we agreed on noting it? Noted. Thank you. Moving swiftly on to item 12, Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, RIPA Annual Report Review and RIPA Policy. I'm being given something to read here, which probably means there's something legislative to say.
No, it's just, no, I was just passing on to you.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. So again, it's a factual paper for noting. I'll ask Anne to introduce again, please.
Chair, this policy comes before the committee every year. There are no substantial changes to it. The only changes are at the end of the policy where there have been changes with officers or to their titles.
Thank you, Anne. What I would add is when I saw this report for the first time last year, I was, I guess, pleasantly surprised with the restraint with which this council exercises those powers and only uses them when it has very strong grounds to do so. Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, I'd just like to endorse your views there, and hope that that continues to be our policy.
Thank you, Councillor Isaac. Our recommendation here is to note the findings of the annual review on authorisations under RIPA and other associated activities and agree the amended RIPA policy, Appendix 1. Are we agreed? Thank you. Moving on to item 13, the viewing of social networking sites. Thank you. Again, I think this is one of yours, Anne. Thank you. If you'd like to introduce it again, please.
Chair, this report comes to the committee every 6 months, so it covers the period from the 1st of June 22 to the 14th of July 23, and the numbers of viewings are set out in the table in the report. Some members might wonder why there are so few this year as compared to the previous year, and I'm told that it was busy the previous year because of the COVID grants that subsequently had to be looked into.
Do any members have any questions? Thank you, Anne. Then are we agreed to note that report? Thank you. We're making good progress time-wise, actually. Moving on to item 14, Treasury Management Annual Report Draft 2022-23. Something I'm sure we'll get our teeth into a bit more. The recommendation here is that Audit Committee reviews the report and makes any comments for consideration by Council. Who would like to open the bidding? Councillor Rattigan. Sorry. I'm sorry. Who is that? Adam. I'm sorry, Adam. Adam would like to introduce the paper.
Thanks, Chair. So I won't go through in great detail the reports. I've taken it as read, but just to note some key points. The net income for the prior year was 3.67 million against budgeting income return of 1.88%. In percentage terms, this is 2.44% compared to 1.61 budgeted. Investment balances were 128.34 million at 31st of March 2023, which is broken down on page 217 in Appendix 1, sets out our holdings. Table 1 on page 205 shows the breakdown of the investment holdings, sort of at a summarised level. Just to point out as well in section 7 are some of the benchmarking information that's provided to us by Alan Close, which was referred to earlier. So chart 4 sets out our position for our internal investment that we manage internally, and chart 5 on page 211 sets out our external funds. And that was all I was going to talk to on this, but I'm happy to obviously take any questions.
Councillor Rattigan.
Are we expecting material difference with the changes in interest rates going forward? I asked that quite.
Yes, so for the budget for 2023-24 is I think about 4.5 million is the expected income on that, and there will be obviously the update coming to the next committee on the performance in Q1.
Are there any other questions? Sorry. I have a couple, if I may, Adam. Chart 5 on page 211. This is the one I was referring to earlier in closed session about what a useful, I can't remember the name of this sort of chart, but scatter, thank you, Councillor Tustain. It's very useful, but I think referring back to Councillor Isaac's point earlier about how these returns should really be measured over 3 or 5 years ideally, I wonder whether we would be able to generate that chart over 5 years for council. I'm getting nods, so I think that's a yes.
Yeah, more than happy to amend the report to get that included.
Thank you. On page 210, table 4, where we talk about total return, Is that the same as what we would call absolute return? Is that essentially the same thing there?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. Just looking back to chart 3 on page 209, we have there our valuation gains and losses, but then our total return with the income return in it. And obviously our income return, when looked at on its own, is outperforming, which is obviously good news. But the capital piece is obviously not doing so well, and that's what the advisors were referring to earlier. When you look at that chart, it looks like we've made 6.5% total return over, I worked it out as 8 years, which is about 0.8% a year. So I think earlier when people were referring to, I think some of the wording used was disappointing and or unspectacular, etc., etc. We obviously have to be careful because our mandate here is that we want to take as little risk as possible, but the returns are, I think, an area where perhaps this committee and or perhaps full council at some point might want to rethink what we're trying to do with residents' money to keep their council tax low. Sure, Sue.
Absolutely. So the current strategy obviously is approved by council, and officers work within that strategy. And the current strategy is very much about revenue income return in order to be able to continue to provide ongoing services to the public. We do, as we've noted earlier, obviously continue to monitor capital value, and because we look at most external funds on a long-term basis, if we start to see, as we are now, sort of some continuing trends that may suggest that we need to review our investments, that's obviously what we do on a quarterly basis with Arlene Close, discuss what our other options are and what our exit strategies might be. So happy for us to include that as part of the monitoring report to Audit and Accounts Committee, any discussions that we've had or any mechanisms that we're planning to take forward for the next period.
Thank you, Sue. I had a couple of other questions here. Let me just filter out what's been dealt with and what hasn't. Oh yes, I think the executive summary on page 204. I think it's missing a summary of our capital losses, and I know that we put them into the accounts and then statute says we take them back out again. But I do think that, you know, for council to have the whole picture, I do think we need to just understand that we are currently sitting on capital losses on those bond portfolios. I think the number is 4.21, but Adam will work the correct number out and drop that into the report, I hope.
Absolutely. So whilst it's detailed in 6.3, we can certainly add the sentence into the executive summary.
Thank you. There was just one other thing that was kind of running through this report, and it talks about we take decisions in the context of Arlene Close's advice and phrases like this. I get the feeling that Arlene Close will advise us on the level of volatility of a particular fund, and that is, and perhaps the credit rating of some of the funds. But I don't think that they advise us, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I don't think they advise us generally on the level of risk taken. Is that a distinction, or is that correct? I don't know.
So officers meet on a monthly basis with myself to look at the current portfolio, what cash funds we have at the time, and how we might want to diversify and generate as much income as we can from those activities. In terms of the long-term external funds we have at the moment, unfortunately I can't comment on what the original decision was around those, because they were obviously, that was done as a bulk, and it was an overall decision to invest in a number of different activities. So one of the bonds, or one of the activities that's actually listed in the appendix, has now matured. So we're now taking advice and discussion with Arlene Close as to what we might do with that funding in the longer term. But that also links through to the update of the capital programme, when we actually need funding to be available, etc. So whilst we're now in a phase where, from capital spend purposes, we are likely to want to utilise a significant amount of this funding, we wouldn't look to put it into long-term funds. We would look at a short-term investment until we understand what that call on the funds is, and at that point we would take a decision in conjunction with Arlene Close as to what best meets our strategy.
Thank you, Sue. Councillor Isaac.
You and I have talked about this in the past, Sue, but I think that Arlene Close clearly are specialists, and they advise a lot of local authorities. But we're managing a lot of money here for residents, and I suppose that if one looks at one's own pensions and portfolios, I think generally speaking, you don't limit the advice you get to one firm. And so I suppose my question is there a point occasionally where in the interests of just making sure that there's a health check on the advice we're getting, and we're not getting groupthink from Arlene Close because of the work they do for all local authorities, that it wouldn't be advisable for us to seek advice just to check things.
Over to Sue.
So obviously, as part of our approved strategy, we are required to appoint an expert to advise us, which obviously currently that advice is provided by Arlene Close. If as a council we were making a decision to do something completely different as part of either the Treasury Management Strategy or the non-Treasury investment strategy, if it was appropriate, we would be absolutely happy to take further advice. In our day-to-day activity, obviously a significant amount of money is in long-term external funds. There's not an awful lot of volatility in terms of the turnover of those. And in terms of the short-term investments, that's obviously led by officer decisions based on what the markets are telling us on a day-to-day basis. So if it was appropriate, absolutely. But at the current time, the way our strategy works and the funds that we have, we've not felt the necessity to have to do that. The only thing we have done is sought some further external advice around ESG and, in terms of sustainability, etc., which will form part of our future reporting, and that is being done by a completely different organisation.
Councillor Atkin, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Can I ask, in one of your roles as a 151 officer, are you speaking to others in local government about pressing central government to address the higher interest rates that we should be getting at banks? Because frankly, I'm not sure we get the right interest rate for our money.
I was going to just say that Sue's alluded to where we're making active investment decisions. We're looking at the best rates at the moment. A lot of those actually are coming from central government on the bond rates, which are at or above the current Bank of England base rate. So we are generating a significant return, and that's already reflected in the budget that was set in February. But we're on track for that at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Okay. I think we were required to make suggestions. Note the Treasury Management Annual Report. That's the recommendation to Council. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. If we move on to item 17, please, the Annual Property Plan 2022-23 Year-End Report. So before going into discussion, there is a pink paper appendix to this. So if you want to discuss the pink papers in confidential session, then we would go into closed session. If not, then Liz can introduce. We can have the debate and then close the item, and/or if we want to do as much of it as we can openly, and then perhaps consider anything in the appendix afterwards and go into closed session, just so that members of the public benefit from as much open discussion as possible. Over to you, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Annual Property Plan 2022-23 Year-End Report. I've assumed you've sort of read the report, so don't intend to go into too much detail. purpose of this report is to outline the activities that have been undertaken for both the operation and investment property portfolio over the last financial year in relation to the annual property plan. Good progress has been made in relation to implementing rent reviews and lease renewals during the year. A total of 18.4 million of rental income has been received from the property portfolio. Again, there's been continued focus on re-gears to increase capital values, improve rental income and encourage inward investment by the private sector, with 2 that have been completed out sort of the last year that this report relates to, with a further sort of 8 that are in negotiations and progressing well, which we'll update at future reports. An ongoing key focus for the team is to review and, where possible, improve or influence the sustainability credentials of the council's assets. And then this requests that the committee note the contents of this report, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Liz. Councillor Rattigan has a question.
You've talked about sustainability of our property portfolio. Are we going to see capital investments on our portfolio to have solar panelling, have wind turbine? Where do you expect us to invest, or our tenants to invest?
So I think it's fair to say that the updated capital programme proposals will come through to council obviously in February for approval, but certainly officers are discussing what opportunities there are to further improve the sustainability of our own assets.
Councillor Isaac.
Evening, Liz, Martin. Thanks for the report. There's been quite a big change in the values of industrial properties. So it's not affecting the income that they're yielding, but it is affecting the capital value. Is that influencing us in any way in terms of the asset management of the portfolio? Or are we taking the view that this is cyclical and they're fundamentally good investments, and they will those values are likely to recover in the years ahead?
Thank you, Councillor Isaac. I would say if you sort of look back to sort of March 2022, when they were the sort of valuations at that point, industrial, the sort of values were much higher. So this is a slight sort of rebalancing of those sort of values. In terms of how we look at it, we monitor it over the period, so it may influence in terms of our disposal strategy in looking at whether it's the right time to bring something to the market or not. So we sort of... Well,
I think you need to turn your microphone on.
Yeah, I do apologise. Yeah. I noticed that the uplift in value attributed to the anvil, and I was sort of slightly puzzled as to why there's been, the valuers think the value of our asset in the anvil has gone up by to such an extent. Have I read it correctly?
Yeah, the values are calculated on a depreciating replacement cost basis, and only a third of the portfolio is valued sort of every year, and that's the main sort of reason, a change in the sort of mechanism of valuation.
Sorry, could you explain that again? I didn't get that.
Yeah, so as Martin said, that operational asset is valued on depreciated replacement cost, which effectively looks at the cost of replacing that building if it were in its current state, and the price of building materials and construction costs has gone up quite considerably, and that's reflected in the increase in value seen this year.
It's a peculiarity then. It's a valuation that is of the replacement value of the asset rather than what it's actually worth in the marketplace. and that presumably is also is true of the aquadrome, which has gone up significantly, as has the Tetley swimming pool. Yeah. Thanks.
I've got Councillor Fillimore, but I've also got Martin wants to come back on that point, I think, first.
Yeah, just coming back on the sort of point of sort of values, what I would say is the rental values, especially for industrial, remain very strong, and there's an underlying strength there across the portfolio, which has been demonstrated by transactions sort of in this financial year as well.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Fillimore.
Yes, Chair, I think this one's for you, not for Martin or Liz. But historically, in this council, there was a motion passed to invest in residential property. It was ignored by previous administrations. Could we ask that to go onto the work programme to be looked at?
Are you asking for it to go on the work programme of this committee?
Yes.
I'm happy to debate that. I'm not quite sure how the mechanism would work, but Sue has a view.
It's actually on one of the scrutiny committees already, so it wouldn't be appropriate to.
Thanks for correcting me, but I'm glad it is.
Sorry? Oh, good. Does that answer your question? I think there's it's certainly an area that should be looked at with regards to investment returns. We are we have a very bond-centric portfolio, but overall our asset base is obviously very, very heavily property, and any opportunity to diversify within that, I think we should take seriously. Are there any other questions or observations anybody has? I have a couple, if I may. So on page 400, we have a table at 4.5 which talks about the investment portfolio total returns. I think I may have just answered my own question. Total returns of minus 6.6%. Yet at 4.6, we have an investment portfolio decrease in value of approximately 10%. I'm guessing the difference is rental income. Or is that a typo?
Sorry, could you repeat my question?
Yeah, sorry. So the table in 4.5 for March 2023 says that our investment portfolio returns are minus 6.6%. But if you look at 4.6, the valuation of our investment portfolio has shrunk from 336 million to 302 million, which is almost exactly 10% fall. So the difference is rental income, yeah. Okay, great, thank you. And I just wanted to highlight at the bottom of page 400, we have property investment strategy additions 9.3 million during 2022-23, and a revaluation change, a downward valuation of 1.5 million to 7.8 million. Is that the Holiday Inn which Councillor Rattigan was supporting Councillor Isaac on earlier?
It's the Premier Inn.
Sorry,
yeah.
Premier Inn.
Yes, it is, and you know, the income remains solid, and we've got an index-linked review, so it's a shift in value.
And of course, the 9.3 includes costs of purchase, which would be stamp duty, etc.
Yeah.
So I believe we paid 8.7, and it's now worth 7.8 million.
Yeah.
Approximately 6 months later, which would be roughly a 10% negative return, 20% annualised. Would that be correct?
Yes, it's certainly gone
so.
Sort of down in value, and you know, the reasons for that are in the primarily.
Obviously, we need to measure over much longer term time frame. Thank you. I also had a question about resourcing on page 405.11.1. I'm delighted to see the professional services contract for annual asset evaluations has been awarded following a comprehensive tender exercise, and that the contract was awarded to Montague Evans. Did you used to work for Montague Evans, Councillor Isaac?
Some years ago I did, yes. I have no connection with them whatsoever now, other than my failure to update my LinkedIn page, but apart from that.
I didn't get it from LinkedIn. I just wanted to check there was no conflict to disclose there. And I guess I do that in the context of the internal audit report earlier, which was flagging up that where we spend £75,000 or more on sort of piecemeal professional services, whether or not you know, Montague Evans was part of that picture, or sometimes it's just useful to look at the threads going through some of these papers, and that was one that I just had a question about, really. Councillor Phillimore.
Very small one for those that are interested. 10.2, 404, community asset, public toilet transfer to Whitchurch. There's still 3 more of these asset types to transfer. Negotiations still ongoing. I'm hoping the new administration will reverse that.
That would be a question for Cabinet, wouldn't it? Thank you. Is that for the minutes? Can we minute that, please, for Councillor Phillimore? Thank you, officers, for the paper. It's very comprehensive, very useful. Does anyone have any questions on the appendix? Do we want to go into closed session, or do we not feel the need to? Getting head shakes, so we won't go into closed session. We won't discuss the appendix, although the detail is noted. Thank you. I am left with, it's nearly 8:30. I think we have time to do the annual governance statement 2022-23, if everyone's in agreement. So if we go back to item 9, this is the statement that will go in our 2022-23 accounts. It's a good, I think, 40 pages on our governance framework, which is, you know, robust and well noted. Are there any questions or anything anybody wants to raise? I'm not seeing any hands or anyone. Oh, Councillor Tustain.
Thank you. And I must say, actually, I really enjoyed reading this. I think it's an excellent report, and it, you know, gave me a lot of insight. I thought, oh, this is what we're doing. This is how it works. So yeah, very, very excellent report. One of the things I noticed is talking about training and things. One thing that wasn't referenced was things like councillor training, for example, which I think is important. That was one point. I made a few notes on here, so bear with me. I'll just see if I had any others. And also something else actually that I felt, and this is something I felt when we had the council plan come out, where we do obviously have performance measures, and we have those performance measures that are done through head of service and things, but the council plan, from my recollection, doesn't have very strong measurable outcomes, which I think would be nice to see. So I think that's obviously a point to note. I think I have spoken to the council leader about that as well.
Do we want to make that as a minute and as a recommendation to Cabinet?
A possible recommendation, yes, please.
Please, thank you.
I think that's probably it for now.
Are there any other questions, or shall we approve that draft annual governance statement? Councillor Tustin.
I think there is actually on page 128 at the very bottom. It says this that it can meet the code from April 2022. I wasn't sure if that was the right date. Is that the right date? Or it's backwards.
We think it's the right date, but officers will check it. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Tustin. Very thorough. Any further questions? Are we agreed? Thank you. We move on. We move on to the Audit and Accounts Work Programme, paper 19, which is page 400 and something, I suspect. 445. We go right at the back. I had one observation on this, which was at the foot of page 445. I think we've got our capital investment strategy and our treasury management strategy headings the wrong way around. I think that so that probably needs just switching around. I also I know that some of the business from this committee last year, Councillor Tustain was quite rightly very keen that we had more training as an audit committee, and so I'd like to see that on the work programme next time. I think Sue has an answer to that.
So Arlene Close come in and do specific training for the audit committee. We just need to agree a date with you, and it's usually undertaken just before one of the audit committees.
Okay. I didn't realise that was a string to Arlene Close's bow. Okay. Councillor Isaac has a question.
Yeah. Unfamiliar as I am with being on committees, where is there any sort of review or contribution in terms of the budget process?
I think Sue would like to handle this one.
So that goes to scrutiny committee.
There's one other thing that we had agreed to look into, which was carrying out a review of the effectiveness of this committee. And again, I think there was in the minutes last time a suggestion that that would come forward at this meeting or a future meeting. But obviously, the list of papers was very long, so I suspect that's been deferred. Will we see that next time? Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any observations on our work programme for the year?
Congratulations, Chair, on getting through this meeting tonight in such timely fashion. But I still would reiterate my opening statement that we don't want to pack the agenda with too many items. March 2024, we've already got 5 items. I just think we have to be sensible in what we discuss.
I completely agree with you, Councillor Phillimore, and I was assured that this was a fairly exceptional meeting that's been driven by it being later in the year than it normally have been. I believe it would normally have been in June, which means a couple of extra papers crept in. We've had the 2021-22 accounts, which would have been approved in December and or March, which has come in and added to the pack. I am assured this is fairly exceptional. I will work with officers to make sure that we get a sensible bedtime read rather than the brick that came through the letterbox a week or so ago. Sue has some comment.
I will check for you, Chair, but I think we're missing the next 6 monthly reports for some of the items that Anne has brought today, so they need to be added onto the work programme.
Okay, but thank you for the compliments on getting through the business. I would like to extend thanks to members for their input tonight. It's been valuable. I think there's been sensible comment and questions that align with the work programme essentially and where we want to take this committee. I'm always keen to encourage more debate, in particular around internal audit, because I think that's a real key function that this committee can oversee. We are lucky that Paul and Richard have managed to clean up that list to such an extent that there was less to talk about tonight. So on that point, I think, I'm looking at officers, but I think we're finished. So we'll wrap it up there at 8:34. Thank you, everybody. See you in September.